When the world goes quiet, some voices still remain. Not every soul finds peace when the clock strikes 12. There are stories hidden in the shadows, whispers drifting between the living and the forgotten. Some stories linger, some souls don't leave. Welcome to Stillness After Midnight, where every silence tells a story. If you're drawn to the mysteries that stir after dark, the voices that echo when the world sleeps, subscribe now and join us as we listen to the souls who still have something to say, because in the stillness, the truth finally speaks. They say that when you travel far enough from home, the world grows thinner. Familiar things take on a slight tilt, like a room in which all the furniture has been quietly rearranged. In those moments, you notice the shadows stretch just a little too long, and even the silence sounds different, weighted, layered with something unsaid. I've always been drawn to places like this, the old cities, the quiet alleys, the houses built long before my parents were born. I used to tell myself it was for the stories, urban legends, whispered warnings, histories that survived only in the trembling voices of the oldest residents. But sometimes I wonder if what I really chased was the feeling of being watched, of brushing up against something ancient and unseen, left behind by those who never truly left. Last autumn, I found myself in Korea, a country of mountains and mist, of temples pressed up against glass towers. I came as a researcher, a foreigner on a fellowship, collecting tales for a thesis nobody would ever read. I pretended it was all academic, just another paper to finish. But the truth is, I was hungry for a kind of fear I could not find at home. Not the kind that comes with monsters or masked men, but the fear that grows slowly, a chill in the bones, the sense that something is standing just out of sight. I was assigned a room in the university's oldest dormitory, a long, narrow building set on the edge of a wooded hill. The roof was tiled, the halls were lined with faded paper notices. At night, the walls seemed to close in, thick with the scent of dust and old incense. The students kept to themselves, polite but distant. They moved through the corridors quietly, as though afraid to disturb whatever else might be listening. On my first night, I was unpacking my bags when I heard it. The steady tap of footsteps, slow and deliberate, crossing the roof above my room. The sound echoed in the old wood, too heavy to be a bird or a stray cat. When I mentioned it at breakfast, the other students exchanged glances, then quickly changed the subject. It was only later, over drinks in a tiny bar off campus, that someone finally whispered the warning. "Don't go up there at night," a girl said, eyes flicking to the door. "If you hear footsteps, pretend you are asleep. Never look out the window. Never climb onto the roof. If you do—" She trailed off, shaking her head, lips pressed tight as though afraid to finish. I asked what she meant, but the conversation dissolved into laughter, the kind that hides more than it reveals. Yet even then, I could sense the shape of the story lurking just beneath the surface. Something about a woman, white shoes and blood that would not wash away. In the days that followed, the footsteps came every night, sometimes soft, sometimes frantic, sometimes pausing right above my bed, as if whoever or whatever was up there was listening for my breath. It's strange what fear does to you. You start to doubt your own senses. The edge of a curtain becomes a watching eye. A chill draft feels like a cold hand on your neck. The line between waking and dreaming blurs until you no longer know which side you're on. I kept telling myself it was just an old building settling, just superstition, nothing more. But as the nights grew longer, I began to understand why the students walked so quietly, why they lit incense in the hallways, why nobody ever left their shoes near the roof. Now, as I sit here years later, recalling those nights, I can still hear the echo of those footsteps. Soft, slow, impossibly heavy. I remember the way the air turned sharp with the smell of rain and something metallic. And most of all, I remember the shoes, white, blood-stained, always left behind on the edge of the roof tiles, waiting for someone foolish enough to follow. Some stories are not meant to be solved. Some doors, once opened, never truly close again. This is the story that followed me home. And tonight, if you listen closely, you may hear her too, pacing, waiting, searching for the one who will listen long enough to understand. That night, the footsteps came again. But it was not just the footsteps that kept me awake. It was the hush that followed, the silence that filled the air after the steps had faded, so complete it felt as if the world itself was holding its breath. I listened, my eyes wide in the dark, counting the spaces between the sounds. I could not tell how long I lay there, tangled in my sheets, uncertain whether I was awake or already drifting into some uneasy dream. Moonlight pressed in through the thin curtains, painting pale lines across the floor. The wind picked up, carrying with it the faintest scent of rain and something older, an unfamiliar tang, metallic and faintly sweet, like rust or old incense. It seeped through the cracks of the window and seemed to settle in the hollows of my bones. I thought of the shoes in the hallway, the stains that looked too dark to be mud. I remembered the attendant's quick denial, the way her eyes darted from my face to the window, as if afraid to linger too long on either. And underneath it all, the story that none of the students wanted to tell, the one I'd heard only in fragments, never the whole, always changed by the teller. It is a strange thing to be a stranger, to stand on the edge of someone else's world, pressed up against customs and beliefs that only half make sense. In the daylight, it was easy to dismiss the oddness of the dormitory as tradition or eccentricity. The burnt incense, the careful way the shoes were lined up, the old woman who swept the stairs every morning, but never once spoke to me. But at night, when the lights went out and the building settled into itself, it was different. The strangeness pressed in, close as skin. I got up and crossed to the window, drawn by something I could not name. The roof was slick with dew, the tiles gleaming in the faint light. From here I could see the narrow alley behind the building, lined with tangled shrubs and a single ancient lantern, its glass fogged with dust. The forest pressed right up to the back wall, branches scratching against the stone like fingers. Somewhere in the dark, a dog barked once, sharp and lonely, then fell silent. I tried to tell myself that it was only my imagination, that the footsteps were just the creak and groan of an old roof settling, the way all buildings do in the night. But part of me, the part that had come here looking for something I could not name, hoped that it was more, that I was not alone, not really, that the boundary between my world and another had thinned, just enough for something to slip through. As I stood there, a sudden gust of wind rattled the window pane. The curtains fluttered, and for a heartbeat, I saw what looked like a shadow flit across the rooftop. A pale blur, gone as quickly as it had appeared. My heart thudded in my chest, loud enough to drown out every other sound. I shut the window, making sure the latch was tight, and forced myself back into bed. Still, sleep would not come. I kept my eyes on the ceiling, tracing the cracks in the plaster, listening for the return of those careful, measured steps. Eventually, exhaustion overtook me, and I slipped into a restless, fractured sleep. My dreams were full of corridors that led nowhere, of shoes lined up in endless rows, of voices calling to me from behind closed doors. In one dream, I stood on the roof in the rain, looking down at my own white shoes, stained and heavy, unable to move. I woke late, to the sound of students hurrying down the hall. For a moment, the events of the night felt distant, a half-remembered story from childhood. But then I saw the shoes again, still sitting at the end of the corridor, white, out of place, waiting. At breakfast in the cramped basement cafeteria, I tried to ask about them. I sat beside a boy named June, whose English was better than most. He laughed when I mentioned the footsteps, but the sound was uneasy, and his eyes darted toward the window as if expecting something to appear. "It's nothing," he said. "Old building. Maybe rats or cats. Sometimes the wind makes strange noises." Gunny, he bit into his toast, but I could see the tension in his jaw. I pressed a little, hoping for a real answer, but he only shrugged and changed the subject, asking about my home, my studies, anything to turn my attention away from the roof. Later in the library, I tried to look up the building's history, but found nothing more than a faded photograph and a line in an old yearbook. Dormitory number 2, established 1957. There were no stories of hauntings, no newspaper clippings, nothing that could explain the sense of unease that had settled over me. Classes began in earnest that afternoon, and for a few hours I forgot about the shoes, the footsteps, the dark stains that wouldn't quite leave my mind. But as evening crept in, the feeling returned, the sense of being watched, the way the corridor seemed to stretch longer and darker as the light faded. The air grew heavier, tinged with the smell of incense and something else, sharp and metallic. When I returned to my room, I found another small offering in the hallway. A bowl of rice, a few coins, a folded scrap of paper I could not read. I bent to look closer and saw that the paper was covered in careful, looping script. The ink faded to brown. I didn't touch it. Somehow it felt like a boundary I shouldn't cross. That night, as I prepared for bed, I hesitated before leaving my shoes in the rack. I thought of the white shoes at the end of the hall, the dark stains, the silent warning in the attendant's eyes. I set my shoes side by side as neatly as I could and whispered a greeting into the darkness, just in case someone was listening. It did not help. The footsteps came again, closer this time, slower, as if the one walking was dragging something heavy behind them. I lay very still, hardly daring to breathe, and counted the steps as they crossed above my ceiling, paused and turned back. The rhythm was hypnotic, almost soothing, until I realized it was matching the beat of my own heart. The steps stopped above my room and did not move again for a long time. I waited in the darkness, certain that if I reached out my hand, I would feel someone waiting on the other side of the wall, just out of sight. When morning finally came, I was not sure if I had slept at all. Outside my door, the white shoes were gone, but a single wet footprint marked the tile, leading away toward the stairs. After the incident with the wet footprint, I found myself counting the hours to dusk. The world outside the dormitory went about its business. Students laughed on the green, delivery men shouted up stairwells, traffic rumbled faintly down the hill. But inside, everything slowed. Time bent around the building's corners, as if the sun set more quickly here, shadows pooling in the stairwells before they reached anywhere else. That evening, I returned from the library determined to stay awake, to watch and listen, to make some sense of the noises that haunted the roof above my room. I tried to convince myself that I was simply tired, jet-lagged, letting homesickness twist everything strange and threatening. But even as I set my things down, I could feel that hush in the air, like the dormitory itself was bracing for something. I made tea in the small shared kitchen, its window looking out onto the alley and the line of pines on the hillside. Someone had left a stick of incense burning in the corner, its smoke curling up in thin blue ribbons. I watched it spiral and vanish, wondering what it was meant to ward off, or whom it was meant to comfort. Back in my room, I tried to focus on anything except the footsteps. I messaged friends back home, watched half an episode of a familiar sitcom, read the same paragraph in a research article 3 times without absorbing a single word. All the while, I kept glancing at the window, half expecting to see a shadow flicker past, or those white shoes lined up outside again. As night settled in, the building grew quieter. The laughter and footsteps of the other students faded. The hum of the city beyond the trees became a faint, distant vibration. Every sound was magnified: the crack of the radiator, the drip of water from the bathroom tap, the soft shudder of the wind against the window. At midnight, I switched off my lamp and lay staring at the ceiling. For a while, all I heard was the low buzz of a distant streetlight and the hush of my own breath. Then slowly, the footsteps began again. It was unmistakable now, a heavy, deliberate pacing across the roof, just as before. Each step landed with a muted thud, the rhythm calm and almost metronomic, pausing at intervals as if the walker was listening or waiting. I counted 6 steps, a pause, then 4 more, another pause. The pattern repeated, drawing a slow, invisible line across the length of the roof. I forced myself to stay still. I reminded myself that the tiles were slippery, that no student would risk wandering there at this hour, that there must be some explanation. Perhaps a caretaker making rounds, though I knew the roof was off limits. Maybe a stray animal, but the steps were too measured, too unmistakably human. My mind wandered back to the stories I'd heard in passing, the way June's laughter faltered when I pressed him for details, the careful avoidance in the attendant's voice. It seemed the dormitory had its own rules, ones nobody wanted to speak aloud. A cold draft slid beneath the window, making the thin curtain flutter. My skin prickled, goosebumps rising up my arms. The steps moved again, this time stopping directly above my bed. The ceiling creaked. I pressed myself into the mattress, as if hiding would make me invisible. There was a moment, long enough to count 10 breaths, when nothing moved. The air felt too thick to inhale, my heart thudding so loudly I was sure it must be audible from the roof. Then suddenly another sound broke the silence, a faint tapping, almost like the tip of a shoe knocking gently against tile. Tap, pause, tap, tap. I imagined a white shoe stained at the toe, searching for something or someone below. I clamped my eyes shut. I tried to remember every logical explanation, every lesson about old buildings and their noises. But the fear had found a crack in my reasoning, and through it, cold certainty seeped in. There was something on the roof, and it was not wind, nor animal, nor caretaker. I do not know how long I lay like that. Minutes, hours. The footsteps resumed, slower now, trailing off toward the far end of the building, until at last they faded into nothing. Only then did I dare to move, to breathe, to let myself believe that the worst of the night was over. The next morning, sunlight poured through the window, brilliant and ordinary. The night's terror seemed absurd in the clean light of day. My shoes sat neatly in their place, untouched. No wet footprints marred the tiles. The white shoes were gone. I left my room half expecting to see some sign, an ash trail, a shadow where none should be. But the corridor was simply itself, blank and echoing. Other students passed, heads bowed, eyes glued to their phones or to the notes clutched in their hands. The dormitory bustled with a cautious normalcy, as if nothing unusual had happened. I resolved not to mention the footsteps again, not to June, nor to the attendant, nor to the old woman who swept the stairs in the mornings. Instead, I watched. I listened. I took in every detail, hoping that in the gaps between ordinary things, I might catch a glimpse of the truth. Later that day, as I crossed the quad, I overheard a group of students murmuring in Korean, their voices lowered to near whispers. The only words I caught were rooftop and shoes. When they saw me looking, they fell silent, exchanging glances, their faces unreadable. It occurred to me that everyone here knew the story. Everyone but me. I returned to the dorm as dusk fell. The scent of incense hung heavier in the air. A new pair of shoes, plain, nondescript, modern, had appeared in the hallway, set apart from the rest, as if left as an offering or a warning. As I closed my door behind me, a shiver ran down my spine. I realized that the sun no longer comforted me. Daylight now only delayed the inevitable return of night. The footsteps, I knew, would come again, and when they did, I would be waiting. I began to notice how people avoided talking about the dormitory after sundown. By day, everything felt ordinary enough. Students hurrying between classes, vending machines humming, the old trees casting patchy shade across the paths. Yet come dusk, a hush settled on the building. The laughter in the hallways grew brittle, and the doors closed a little faster. If I wanted answers, I would have to seek them out before night claimed the place. One afternoon I found Jun and a few others clustered at the edge of the quad, beneath a ginkgo tree whose yellow leaves littered the steps like scraps of sunlight. They sat cross-legged, trading snacks and stories between bites of spicy rice cake. I approached with a careful smile and waved a box of cheap cookies as a peace offering. Jun looked up, his eyes wary but not unkind. "Is it true," I asked, lowering my voice, "that someone died here, in our dormitory?" For a moment no one answered. Hana fiddled with her phone, pretending not to hear. A broad-shouldered student with thick glasses, Min, glanced at Jun as if weighing whether to speak. Then Jun sighed. "It's an old story," he said. "A story like this changes with every mouth." That answer, both refusal and invitation, was exactly what I needed. I pressed on. "Tell me one, any version." They exchanged looks as if comparing the danger of telling a foreigner with the relief of making the tale real again. Hana met my eyes and said, "Do you want the careful one or the honest one?" "Give me the honest one," I said. There was a small, foolish part of me that wanted to be scared properly, to feel the hair rise on my arms for reasons I could put my finger on. Jun's voice dropped. "Years ago, maybe 30, maybe more, time stretches, there was a woman who lived here. Some say she was a student, some say a cleaner, some say the wife of a visiting professor. Names change with retelling. The truth refused to keep a shape. What she wore was always the same in every version, a white hanbok, simple with white shoes. White is for mourning here, you know. People wear white to show they belong to the dead for a time." He folded his hands together as if holding a small invisible thing. Min added, "They found her on the roof, or someone found her shoes there. Sometimes both. The shoes were soaked, not snow or rain, not mud, blood. The police came. A crowd came. Then the story split. Suicide, murder, a mistake, a ritual gone wrong. Every time someone tried to close the story, a new crack opened." Hana's eyes went distant. "Some say she was forgotten, left alone by those who promised to stay. Some say she was humiliated in front of the whole hall and could not face the shame. Others say she was betrayed by someone who carried another's name in his pocket. The details twist, but the ache is the same." She tapped her phone screen as if to pin the words down, and then let them go. I felt the hum in my chest tighten. Sympathy, yes, but also the particular, sharp prickle of curiosity. There was something in the texture of these variations that made them less like lies and more like refracted truth, each version catching a different wound. "Do people still see her?" I asked. Jun smiled, but it was hollow. "Sometimes. Sometimes the roof is empty, and you hear the clack of a shoe anyway. Sometimes you find white things where they shouldn't be, handkerchiefs, a shoe. Once a senior swore that the shoes walked themselves, that they shuffled along the tiles as if looking for a pair to match. Another boy said he saw a shadow pacing the edge, hair falling like a curtain over a face. He screamed and left the dorm at midnight, and he hasn't come back to campus since." Min scoffed softly. "And then there's the monk story." "At the temple?" Hana asked, nodding. "A monk from the temple down the hill came once," June said. "There are always monks when something loses its way. He burned incense and set out offerings on the roof. Bowls of rice, broth, tea. He rang a small bell and read prayers. For a while the footsteps stopped. But legends are stubborn. They don't mind offerings. They want things said straight. They told me about an old woman who used to live behind the campus. She swept every morning because sweeping kept her own ghost quiet. The old woman would leave little paper fortunes outside the stairwell doors, small talismans to hold off what she called the staying. She would not speak of the woman on the roof directly, but when she folded her hand to her chest and breathed 3 times, everyone in the hallways felt the air press in a little tighter. As twilight arrived, their faces took on softer edges. I could see then how these accounts were not simply stories to frighten newcomers. They were a kind of map. Where to look, where not to look, how to leave your shoes, what to burn, when to stay indoors. Each variation contained a rule, and each rule held some small mercy. That night, after I had spoken with them, and after I had watched the ginkgo leaves spin in the wind, I walked slowly through the dorm, listening. The hall smelled of old wood and incense. Someone had left a small bowl of rice by the stairwell. Coins glinted beside it in the lamplight. On a nearby ledge lay a scrap of paper with a small, careful seal pressed into it, a protection perhaps, or a memory. I paused by the window at the far end of the corridor. From here I could see the slope of the roof tiles, slick and black under a low moon. A white shape rested near the ridge. Perhaps an old bag, perhaps nothing. My breath steamed in the chill. My fingers went numb against the cool glass. And then, for the barest slice of time, I saw movement. A figure on the roof, a pale smear standing upright, no more than suggestion. She walked the length of the tiles with a slow, shuffling step, head bowed, hair falling like a veil. In that briefness, she was both distant and impossibly close. The world had narrowed to her silhouette and the small sound of her steps. I blinked and she was gone. Wind lifted the loose strand of my hair, and the shadow of a leaf fell across the sill. My heart pounded like a drum, and I found my hand pressed to my mouth to keep from making sound. A door opened behind me. The attendant had come down to the landing, balancing a small tray with tea. She saw me, and for the first time I noticed how the skin around her eyes carried a permanent fatigue, like someone who has learned to expect the night to bring business of its own. "You saw?" she asked quietly, as if we were sharing something private. "Yes," I said, voice raw. "I thought I did." She nodded once in a way that meant she believed me, but hoped I hadn't. "Do not go to the roof," she said in clipped English. "Do not be curious. Curiosity keeps it awake. Respect the place where grief sits. That is all." Her words were not stern. They were tired and small and better understood as a plea. I had the urge then to argue, to say that I was a researcher, that curiosity was my work, that understanding solves things. But the look in her eyes stopped me. It was not fear alone. It was something like grief that had learned to live with itself. I left the corridor with my head bowed. The stories had not resolved anything for me. They had only tilted my view, sharpening a sense of the building as a body with sore spots. Each tale was a whisper that pressed against the same seam: abandonment, shame, a place where a promise was broken and would not stay buried. Back in my room that night, sleep felt less like escape and more like shrinking into a space already occupied by memory. I placed a small coin on my desk, half as a joke, half like an offering, and sat with it until the lamps went out. I listened to the dorm breathe. I listened for the steps. I listened as stories like smoke moved through the halls, leaving everything slightly stained. When the footsteps came, as they always did, they seemed this time to carry an urgency, a searching. They moved not like someone marking time, but like someone trying doors, testing the boundaries between what was and what should be. They paused above my head, and for a moment the sound felt like bone against wood. Then, as if answering something only she could hear, the steps moved away. I lay in the dark and counted the old rules in my head. Don't go to the roof. Do not leave shoes out. If you hear footsteps, pretend you sleep. The rules felt like lifelines. I held them close and let their small, brittle logic keep me from climbing the stairs. In the morning, the coin was still on the desk. But just outside the stairwell, near the bowl of rice, I found a single white thread, caught on the edge of the lip, like the end of a hem left by a hurried hand. For the rest of that day, I could not tell if I had been given a warning or a gift. Either way, the story had hooked into me, and I could feel it beginning to pull. It was the absence of sound that made the pair stand out at first. In a corridor full of shoes, sneakers in crumpled heaps, sandals lined like soldiers, the white shoes seemed to have been placed with care. They sat on a little patch of tile near a paper lantern, small and stubbornly clean in the dim light, as though whoever left them wanted them seen. I had seen white shoes before in the hall, the ghostly placeholders at the center of so many half-remembered tales. But those had always been distant, up on the roof or at the very far end of the building, where the shadows gathered. This pair was different. They were in the path of ordinary feet, right where anyone might pass. The left shoe tilted slightly as if ready to step. The right shoe lay flat, its laces tied in a neat bow, the way a mother might tie a child's shoe. For a foolish moment, I expected someone to appear, to laugh and pull them on. An elaborate prank to unsettle the new foreigner. The dormitory had its share of pranks, but no one came. The corridor hummed with the faint leak of a fluorescent light and the distant clatter of dishes from the cafeteria. A fly buzzed lazily against the paper lantern and then was gone. The white shoes remained, impossible and mute. I knelt to look closer. They were canvas, soft with the give of worn material, not the stiff, ceremonial shoes I'd pictured when I thought of a hanbok. Under the lip, there was a darkened rim, as if the canvas had soaked in something that refused to dry. My throat tightened at the sight. I had seen that dark before, and it had not been rain or mud. On impulse, I reached out one hand and touched the edge of the toe. The fabric was cool, and at the point my fingers brushed the stain, a memory uncoiled inside me. An image of hands trembling over a sink, the helpless thick rub of cloth against skin. I pulled my hand back, suddenly aware of how inappropriate it felt to touch what seemed to belong to someone else's sorrow. A visitor in someone else's grief is still an intruder. As I rose, a sound split the hallway. A small, surprised laugh from somewhere behind me. I turned. It was Hannah carrying a stack of notes and a half-drunk coffee, her hair in a messy knot. Her eyes widened when she saw me kneeling by the shoes, and for a second there was a flash of something like apology in her face, as if she had forgotten they were there, and then remembered the rule that said you never ignore what is left behind. "They appeared this morning," she said, approaching with cautious steps. "Nobody knows who left them. Do you think—" I began, then stopped. What did I think? That the shoes belonged to the woman from the stories? That the myth had decided to make its presence physical and inconvenient? Or that someone was playing with the edges of our nerves? Hannah did not smile. "These aren't the kind of shoes anyone wears here," she said. "They're old. They have a shape like someone smaller, or someone who kept their feet tucked, like a person who learned to be careful." Her voice dropped, as if the corridor itself might be listening. "We put them here because once they were found in the strange places. People leave them where they can be seen, to remind the roof that someone is watching." She reached down and placed a small paper fortune beside the shoes, a folded strip sealed with a flat, stamped charm. The charm looked ancient, its ink bled and patient. She did not touch the shoes, only the paper, setting it with a respect that felt like a prayer. Then she stood and looked at me with an odd, steadying look. "Don't pick them up," she warned. "If you pick them up, you invite them to step into you." Words like that are half ceremony, half superstition, and when you live among people who have learned to live with small rituals, you accept them because acceptance becomes a precaution. I nodded, though my curiosity burned like a fever in my chest. Even so, I did not move the shoes. It felt wrong in a way I could not rationalize. An instinct I would later call caution, though then it was simply a hush I obeyed without question. Over the next few days, the shoes became a sort of collectible in the dorm's whispered economy. Students stopped by to glance, to lay a coin or a small strip of paper beside them, to whisper an apology into the corridor, as if speaking the name of the dead would soothe some impatient thing. Some left offerings of rice or a single cup of tea. One senior, braver than the rest, said he had seen the shoes shift their position in the middle of the night, as if the wind had nudged them, though the rest of us suspected no wind could explain the measured precision of whatever moved on the roof. Rumors bent and folded around the shoes. Some said they had belonged to the woman in the hanbok. Others swore they had been left by a student trying to call the spirit's attention, a kind of reckless provocation. A few of the older residents muttered that sometimes objects become anchors, and once an anchor is found, the sea remembers where it was dropped. That evening, I returned late from the library to find the pair gone, and a damp smudge on the tile where they had rested. A neighbor told me she had seen a shadow cross the roof around the time they disappeared, and that the step matched the slow, patient cadence I had begun to learn by heart. The attendants said nothing, only exchanged flat looks and left another bowl of rice near the stairwell. In that bowl, someone had tucked a note folded into the shape of a small boat. On its surface were the faint loops of a handwriting I could not read. Sleep grew thinner. I began to dream of shoes, white after white, lining up in an endless row on a black roof. In the dream, I was not a foreigner or a researcher. I was a pair of shoes waiting to be worn, and my laces throbbed like veins. It was the smallest details that haunted me. The way a bow tied perfectly and then came undone. The way the fabric took on the color of whatever it rested against. On the fourth morning after I first saw them, I woke to find a shoe on my windowsill. One white shoe, not whole, just a single solitary piece like a punctuation mark. It lay there as if it had been placed by careful hands, toes aimed at the dorm, heel pouring light toward the room. I remember the trembling in my hands when I pulled the curtain back. The shoe was the right size to fit no one I knew. Beside it, tucked under the heel, was a slip of paper with 3 small characters, neatly written, deliberate. I took the shoe into my room with a reverence that bordered on the ridiculous. I set it on my desk and turned it over on my palm. The fabric was thin and soft. The inside carried the faint scent of staleness and incense. At the pointed toe, something dark had dried into the weave, a crusted smear I had been trying not to imagine. For reasons I could not explain, tears came to my eyes. Not grief exactly, something more like recognition. I carried the shoe to the old woman who swept the stairs. Her face, when she saw it, did not show surprise. She sat down on the bottom step, paused, and then made a slow motion of folding her hands, as if turning the shoe into a small prayer. "You opened it," she said, not asking, merely stating what she saw. "You brought a thing inside where it does not belong." Her voice was dry like old rice paper. "If it came to you on its own, that is one thing. If you took it, that is another." "I didn't take it," I said. "It was by my window." She regarded me with eyes that had watched more nights than any of us. "Then keep it safe," she said, "but do not sleep with it beside you, the dead favor where you rest." That night I placed the shoe in a drawer and left the small strip of paper on top, as if the two were companions. I didn't sleep well. In the dark, half weighted by dream, I heard footsteps above my head. They paused and then, with a soft, almost hesitant sound, something moved across the roof. For a brief moment, I imagined the steps were searching for the missing mate. The image of a lone shoe drawn to its pair snagged in me like a hook. The next morning, the shoe on my desk was damp where it touched the paper. The edges of the note had softened. The lines of ink blurred just a touch, as if something adjacent to it had wept. I had crossed a line. I meant to study what had come to me, its material, its stains, any clue that could be turned into data. Instead, I had become part of the ritual, a keeper of something that refused to belong to my neat scientific categories. The shoes, in their quiet way, had decided I was a listener, and listening, I found, meant paying attention to the things that moving hands cannot explain. There comes a point when curiosity stops being innocent. It hardens, turns into a kind of hunger. That was where I found myself, carrying a single white shoe in my drawer, listening at night for the steps that hunted for its missing half, and realizing I had already crossed into the current of the story. By then, I had begun asking questions more directly. Most of the students avoided me, offering polite smiles, quick excuses. But one evening, in a small tea shop off campus, Jun leaned close and muttered that if I truly wanted answers, I should go to the temple on the hillside. "There's a monk there," he said, barely audible over the rattle of the kettle. "Old, doesn't speak much to strangers, but he knows." "Knows what?" June stared into his cup. "That roof has history. Monks tried to soothe it long ago. Most left when the sound came back. But he stayed." I pressed for more, but June only shook his head, as if saying the words aloud any longer would invite something unwanted into the room. The temple was not far, though the walk up the hill was steep and shaded by twisted pines. Lanterns hung from the trees, faded silk shades that swayed gently in the wind. Prayer flags fluttered, their colors bleached, their edges ragged. The air was heavy with the scent of smoke and pine sap. When I reached the gate, the courtyard lay quiet. A single monk swept fallen needles into neat piles. His robe was gray, frayed at the hem, his head bent in concentration. The only sound was the slow scrape of the broom against stone. I waited until he looked up. His eyes were pale, clouded with age, but sharp in a way that made me feel suddenly transparent. I bowed awkwardly, trying to imitate what I had seen others do. "I live at the university," I said. "In the old dormitory." The broom stopped mid-sweep. His gaze lingered on me for a long time. Then he set the broom aside and motioned for me to follow. Inside, the temple was dim. Candles guttered before small wooden statues, their faces serene but worn. The air tasted of old incense. I sat across from him on a mat while he poured tea into two chipped cups. We drank in silence, the sound of the liquid louder than our breaths. At last he said, "You hear the steps?" It wasn't a question. I nodded. "You saw the shoes?" "Yes." "And you kept one." I flinched. "How do you know that?" He gave the smallest smile, not unkind. "When a spirit chooses you, its mark shows. The air around you is not clean. It clings." He leaned forward. "Why do you let it?" The words stung. "Because I want to understand. I came here to learn the truth." "Isn't that better than pretending it doesn't exist?" He shook his head slowly. "Truth does not free the dead. It binds the living. Curiosity is a rope. Once tied, it pulls you where you did not mean to go." I thought of the shoe in my drawer, dampening paper with its unseen tears. I thought of the sound of measured footsteps above me, pausing as if listening for my breath. "What happened to her?" I asked. "Who was she?" He closed his eyes. His lips moved, murmuring a name I could not catch, lost in the whisper of the temple. Then he spoke clearly. "She was betrayed, left alone, mocked, her shame heavy. She carried that weight to the roof. But before she fell, her last thought was not sorrow. It was rage, and rage does not leave easily." Here he reached into the folds of his robe and drew out a small brass bell. He rang it once, a clear tone that seemed to slice the air. "The sound of shoes at night is the sound of unfinished memory. You hear not her steps, but her anger walking in circles. She is not looking for mercy. She is looking for recognition." "Can she be freed?" He studied me a long time before answering. "Perhaps, but freedom is not always release. Sometimes it is acknowledgement. Sometimes it is repetition. Be careful which you offer." I left the temple with his words burning in my mind. The lanterns swayed behind me, shadows stretching long across the ground. At the bottom of the hill, I turned once to look back. The monk was standing at the gate, still as stone, watching until I was out of sight. That night I lit no lamp. I sat in the dark with the shoe before me, the paper charm laid carefully across its rim. I whispered apologies I did not understand. I spoke names I did not know. Above me the footsteps began again, slow, deliberate, pausing at the edge of my ceiling. For the first time I whispered back, "I hear you." The silence that followed was heavier than the sound. After the meeting with the monk, the dormitory no longer felt like a building, it felt like a mouth. Its corridors were teeth, its rooms pockets of breath. Every step echoed too long, and every shadow looked like it might close in if I turned away. The monk's words would not leave me. Curiosity is a rope. Once tied, it pulls you where you did not mean to go. I could feel the rope tightening already. The white shoe in my drawer was no longer an object. It was a weight, an anchor, a silent witness in the dark. I wondered if I should return it, but return it where? To the corridor? To the roof? To her, that evening, the air carried the faint smell of rain, though the sky was clear. Students hurried through the hallways more quickly than usual, shutting their doors with soft but urgent thuds. Someone left a dish of tangerines at the stairwell, their bright skins glowing in the dim light. A strip of red paper was tucked beneath them, written with characters I could not read. I paused before my own door, key in hand, and felt the old hush pressing close, the kind that seems to know your heartbeat. The night deepened. I sat at my desk with a lamp lit low, pretending to work, but my eyes kept straying to the drawer. I knew the shoe was there. I could almost hear it breathing. The lamp flickered once, then steadied. Sometime past midnight, the footsteps began. This time they were slower, dragging, like someone carrying a burden too heavy to set down. Each step landed with a dull weight that made the ceiling groan. I froze, the pen still in my hand, and listened. The steps moved back and forth, then paused directly above me. I waited for the silence to stretch into stillness, but instead came something new. A whisper. At first it was faint, like the wind moving through leaves. Then it gathered shape, syllables I could not understand, a voice low and raw. It was speaking in Korean, though broken, as though the tongue itself resisted. The sound brushed against the walls of the room, against my skin, as if the voice was not above me, but all around me. I pressed my hand over my mouth, afraid to make a sound. The lamp dimmed again. The shadow it cast across the rice paper screen by my window grew darker, thicker. At first it was only a blur, but then it sharpened into a form, the outline of a woman standing still. The shape wavered as though the paper itself had become water. I shut my eyes tight. I told myself it was only the sway of a tree outside, but no branches reached that high. When I opened them again, the outline was still there, slender, still, her hair falling long, her head bowed. The whispering grew louder. I strained to catch a word, any word, but each time it slipped away like mist. What struck me most was not the content but the tone. The voice did not beg, did not plead. It accused. It demanded. And then came the sound that unraveled me, a sharp knock against the window frame, 3 times, steady and deliberate. I could not move. My heart hammered so hard it hurt. I thought of the monk's words, acknowledgement, not release. I wondered if silence would keep me safe, or if silence itself was the insult. So I whispered back, hoarse, "I hear you." The room fell still. The whispering stopped. The shadow on the screen thinned, dissolved, leaving only the faint pattern of the paper. But the footsteps remained, retreating now, each step fading into the far edge of the roof, until nothing was left but the shiver in my chest. In the morning I searched the hall. On the sill outside my door lay a folded scrap of paper. No shoe this time, only the note. The ink was blurred, but I could make out 3 characters, neat and deliberate. I showed it to June later, pretending curiosity without urgency. He paled when he saw it. It says, "Wait for me." I tucked the paper into my pocket and said nothing. But all day the words beat against my ribs like a second pulse. That night I dreamed of walking on the roof in bare feet. The tiles were slick with rain that hadn't fallen. Behind me I heard shoes following, white shoes, tapping slowly, staining the tiles red as they came. I woke with damp sheets and the scent of incense in the air, though I had lit none. The drawer was ajar, though I was certain I had closed it, and inside the shoe was gone. The morning after the shoe vanished, I felt hollowed out. The drawer gaped open as though mocking me, and no amount of searching produced even a trace of canvas or paper. It wasn't only the loss of the object. It was the sense that it had been taken back, that I had only been entrusted with it briefly, long enough to prove my attention, before it was reclaimed. I couldn't stay passive anymore. Curiosity had become compulsion. I needed the shape of the story, needed to see its edges, to know where the truth lay beneath all the shifting. So I went to the library. The university's library was a cavern of old paper and fluorescent light, each floor colder than the one before. I began in the local history section, flipping through yearbooks and student newsletters. At first, nothing, just lists of names, smiling photographs of sports teams, grainy shots of club events. But the year 1989, 36 years earlier, contained a gap. No spring festival photos, no sports teams, just a single black and white picture of the dormitory, the roof line stark against the sky. The caption, Dormitory number 2, under renovation. Renovation. That was a word that could mean anything. I dug deeper, pulling reels of microfilm from a dusty cabinet. Old local newspapers, their pages crackling with age. It was tedious, scanning headline after headline, until one fragment caught my breath. University incident. Woman found dead near dormitory roof. The article was brief, only 3 paragraphs. A woman, not a student, but associated with faculty, had been discovered late at night after a fall from the roof. Her shoes were left behind, though police declined to speculate on their meaning. No name was given. The university expressed condolences. That was all. I sat back in the hard chair, staring at the screen. The words were clinical, stripped of anything human. But I imagined the scene. Students clustering in the courtyard, whispers darting like shadows, officials trying to silence the story before it spread. Who was she? Wife? Mistress? Cleaner? The article refused to say. Later, I sought out one of the oldest professors on campus, a man named Dr. Kim, whose lectures had the heavy, deliberate rhythm of someone used to being the last word in a room. I asked cautiously, framing my interest as research into urban legends. At first, he chuckled. Foreign students always love ghost stories. But when I mentioned the footsteps on the roof, his smile tightened. Those are just creaks. An old building breathes at night. Yet his eyes flicked away, betraying the lie. I pressed gently. Was there ever a death there? His sigh was long, like someone setting down a weight. Yes, there was an accident. He paused. But accidents are never as simple as they seem. He would say no more. Back at the dorm, I tried my luck with the attendant, the same woman who had warned me once to stay in my room. She was polishing the stairwell railing, her motions sharp and methodical. Do you remember her? I asked. The rag stilled in her hand. For a long time, she said nothing. Then, I was a student here once, younger than you are now. I heard the footsteps then, too. She set the rag down and looked straight at me. Do not think you will solve this. Others have tried. Some moved away, some went mad. The story is not for solving, it is for carrying. Her words chilled me more than any scream. That night in my room, I spread the articles and notes across my desk. A woman, dead on the roof. A pair of shoes left behind. A whisper of betrayal, of shame. A story that shifted with each mouth, but always returned to the same image. White shoes on the tiles, dripping with something that refused to dry. I leaned back, exhausted. My lamp buzzed. In the silence between the flickers, I thought I heard a voice again. Low, cracked, threaded through the walls. It was not a full sentence, just a sound, like a syllable trying to be born. But it was enough to tell me one thing. The more I searched for her story, the more she searched for me. I had been waiting for her. Not in the way one waits for a friend or a letter, but in the way a condemned man waits for the sound of a key in the lock. I knew it was coming. The stories, the shoe, the monk's warning. Everything had been moving toward a moment when rumor would sharpen into vision. That evening, the air carried the weight of a storm that never broke. Students moved quickly through the halls, their doors shutting with the finality of tombs. Incense curled from a dozen clay bowls, filling the corridors with its cloying sweetness. Even the old woman with her broom was nowhere to be seen, as if she too had withdrawn into silence. I lit no lamp. I wanted to face whatever came without the illusion of protection. The room sank into shadow, the moon laying a silver edge across the desk where my papers lay scattered. The window rattled once, then stilled. And then, as I had half prayed, half dreaded, the footsteps began. They were not the hesitant pacing I had grown used to. They were slower, heavier, each one landing with such weight that the ceiling above my head seemed to bow. The rhythm was relentless, unhurried, like someone who had finally decided there was no need to pretend anymore. My heart raced. I forced myself to breathe, shallow and even, as though I could trick her into believing I slept. But another part of me, reckless, starving for truth, rose and carried me to the window. I pushed the screen aside with trembling hands and leaned into the night. The roof stretched before me, a sloping sea of black tile, glistening faintly with dew. And there, at its center, she stood, a woman in white. The hanbok clung to her thin frame, the fabric rippling as though moved by a wind I could not feel. Her hair fell forward in a curtain, black and long, veiling her face completely. Her feet were bare, yet each step she took left a wet imprint on the tiles, dark stains spreading like ink in water. I should have turned away. I should have pulled the screen shut and buried myself beneath blankets. But I was rooted, unable to look anywhere else. She walked the length of the roof, her head bowed, her hands limp at her sides. With each step came the soft, hollow sound I had been hearing for weeks. When she reached the edge, she paused, toes hovering just above the gutter, and for a moment I thought she would leap. Instead, she turned. The movement was slow, deliberate, like a clock hand shifting into place. Her hair swayed, parting just enough for me to glimpse what lay beneath. Her face was pale, almost luminous in the moonlight. But it was not the softness of skin I saw. It was the flat, unyielding pallor of something that had forgotten warmth. Her eyes, if they were eyes, were dark hollows, endless, patient. And yet within them I felt not emptiness, but pressure, as if an entire tide had fixed itself on me alone. She did not speak. She only stood, head tilted slightly, as though listening to the frantic beat of my heart. A sound escaped my throat, half gasp, half plea. At that, she moved. One step, then another, her wet footprints marking the tiles between us. She did not rush. She had no need. The distance between us shrank with a terrible slowness, every second drawn out until it felt eternal. I stumbled back from the window, but I could not break my gaze. She stopped only a few feet away, close enough that the moonlight revealed the stains at the hem of her hanbok. Dark, thick, dried into the fabric like bruises that never healed. Her head tilted further. From beneath the veil of hair, I thought I heard the faintest whisper, too faint to be words, too sharp to be wind. Then she raised one hand. The motion was trembling, almost fragile. Her fingers spread, pale and thin, nails darkened as if stained by soil or something thicker. She pressed her palm against the window pane. Cold pierced through the glass, stabbing into my skin, my marrow. My breath clouded instantly, frosting the pane between us. She leaned closer, her face nearly touching the glass, her hair brushing across the divide. I could not move. The world had shrunk to her hand, her eyes the impossible nearness of the dead. And then, just as suddenly as she had come, she stepped back. One pace, two. She turned, hair falling once more to cover her face. She walked across the roof, each step leaving its black mark, until the night swallowed her at the far edge. The silence that followed was so deep, it felt like drowning. I collapsed to the floor, shaking, my breath ragged. The frost on the glass lingered long after she had gone, and in its fading outline, I could still see the imprint of her hand. I did not sleep. I sat through the night, watching the roof, waiting for her to return. She did not. But the mark on the window remained until dawn, a pale, ghostly palm print that no amount of wiping could remove. By morning, I understood something new. I was no longer just an observer. She had seen me. She had chosen me. And once chosen, there is no turning back. The handprint never faded. Morning light swept across the glass, but the pale frost palm clung stubbornly, a stain that was not ice, not moisture, but memory burned into matter. I tried wiping it with cloth, with warm water, even with soap, but the mark only blurred, spreading like a bruise on the pane. At last I stopped, afraid that by rubbing harder I might erase something I was not meant to erase. That night I left the window shut tight, curtain drawn. I thought that by denying her entry, I might hold the story at a distance. But possession does not ask permission. It seeps. It waits. The first signs were in my sleep. I dreamed I was walking the roof again, barefoot. My steps left red stains, though I felt no cut, no wound. Ahead of me, the woman in white walked slowly, her back always turned. No matter how quickly I moved, I never caught up. She would pause, tilt her head, then continue, as if measuring the distance between us like a thread she held in her hands. Each morning I woke exhausted, as though I had walked all night. My soles tingled with a soreness that should not have been there. Once I pulled back the sheets and found a smear of dirt across the bedclothes, a line of soil as if I had stepped in from the outside. By the third night, the dreams changed. I was no longer only following. Sometimes I looked down and found I was wearing her shoes, white canvas stained at the toes. They fit perfectly, though they were not mine. When I lifted my foot, the tile beneath me glistened with blood. I woke with my breath ragged, my heart pounding like a drum, and on my desk lay a single shoelace, damp and dark at one end. During the day, reality began to tilt. In lectures, I caught myself drifting, words dissolving into whispers I couldn't translate. Walking across campus, I saw flashes of white at the edges of my vision, slender hems vanishing around corners, hair slipping behind pillars. Once I passed a mirror in the restroom, and for a split second the reflection was not mine, but hers. Face hidden, body swathed in white, standing too close. Jun noticed the change. He pulled me aside one afternoon, his eyes sharp with worry. "You look thin, like you haven't slept in weeks." "I haven't," I admitted. "You need to leave that dormitory." I shook my head. "It's too late. She knows me now." Jun paled, his voice lowering. "If she's chosen you, it means she wants something, but no one knows what. Be careful. If you give too much, she'll take the rest." His warning settled in my chest like a stone. That evening, I returned to my room and found the drawer open again. Inside lay the white shoe, the same one that had vanished days earlier. It was dry now, its canvas stiff, but the stain remained. And next to it, folded neatly, was a piece of paper. I unfolded it with trembling hands. The writing was the same, careful, deliberate characters. This time I asked Jun to translate. He frowned. "It says, 'Walk for me.'" The rope tightened. I felt it in my chest, in my bones. I had already been walking for her, in dreams, in silence. Now she wanted me to continue. Waking, living. That night, the footsteps on the roof began as usual. But soon I realized something chilling. Their rhythm matched my own pulse. When I shifted in bed, the steps shifted. When I held my breath, they paused. It was no longer just her walking. It was us. The worst came 3 nights later. I woke suddenly, drenched in sweat. The air was heavy, clinging to my skin. I sat up and froze. Across the floor, leading from the window to my bed, lay a line of wet footprints. Bare, small, each one glistening as though freshly made. I followed them with my eyes, heart hammering. They ended at the edge of my mattress. I forced myself to look down, and there, just inches from my own, was another pair of feet, pale, silent, standing in the dark. I looked up slowly, dread crawling up my spine. She was there, in my room. The woman in white stood at my bedside, hair falling forward, head bowed. Her hand hung limp at her side, fingers twitching as though remembering the shape of a gesture unfinished. The smell of old incense and iron filled the air. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. She leaned closer, her hair brushing against my arm. For a moment I thought she would speak, that the whispers would finally form words I could understand. But instead she pressed her cold hand against my chest. My body convulsed. A shock, like icy water, surged through me. My vision blurred. I felt something enter, something heavy, patient, filled with grief and rage. When I gasped, the breath that left me was not my own. It carried a sound, a syllable that belonged to her. And in that moment I knew. The boundary between us was thinning. She no longer needed the roof. She had found a place inside me. Possession changes the way you hear the world. Every sound carried double weight now, once as itself, and again as an echo deep inside me. My footsteps thudded in my ears even when I sat still. The wind seemed to speak in two voices, one my own, the other hers. Sometimes I could no longer tell which breath belonged to me, and with that overlap came memories that were not mine. I would be walking across campus when suddenly the trees around me blurred in a courtyard long gone, and I smelled boiled rice, old soap, a man's tobacco smoke. In class, the professor's chalk strokes across the board dissolved into angry voices, jeering laughter, whispers that left me burning with humiliation. I realized she was not merely haunting me. She was showing me, forcing me to carry her fragments. The first clear piece came in the archives again. I had returned to the library compulsively, hoping to stitch together what I was being shown. Buried deep in a faculty newsletter from 1989, I found it. A passing mention of a visiting scholar dismissed suddenly due to personal scandal. No name, only an initial, but alongside the note was a photograph. A group of professors, their wives and assistants gathered at a banquet table. And there, half in shadow, half blurred, was a woman in a white blouse. Her hair fell over one eye. Her smile was small, uncertain. I stared at that photograph until the edges of the page swam. The woman on the roof, before the roof. The second piece came not from paper, but from June. He came to my room one night with his hands trembling, holding out a notebook. "I shouldn't show you this," he whispered. "It belonged to my aunt. She lived here in the dorm during the 80s. She wrote about the woman." The notebook was faded, its pages brittle. I turned them carefully. Most entries were mundane. Class schedules, food complaints, exams. But then, April 12th. They found her crying again near the laundry. Some girls laughed at her shoes, said she was dressed for a funeral. She didn't answer, just kept rubbing at the stains on the canvas like she could wash them away with spit. April 19th. People whisper that she was left, that the man who promised her marriage chose someone else. They say she was made a joke in the cafeteria, that the professors looked away while the students sneered. I don't know, but I keep hearing footsteps at night. April 21st. Tonight she went to the roof. The entry ended there. The next page was blank. I closed the notebook slowly, my fingers numb. The silence between the words spoke louder than the writing. The third piece came from within me. That night the dreams returned, more vivid than ever. I was no longer following her across the roof. I was standing where she had stood, staring down at the courtyard below. Voices jeered, faceless figures pointing upward, their laughter sharp and merciless. My hands trembled. Shame poured through me like boiling water. And then came betrayal. I turned and beside me stood a man, a professor, tall, distinguished, face blurred but familiar. His eyes slid away from mine. His hands slipped from my grasp. He stepped back, leaving me alone at the edge. The rage that followed was not human. It was molten, unbearable. It filled my chest until I could not breathe. I woke screaming. By then, the pieces fit enough to see their shape. She was not a myth, not a nameless shadow. She was a woman betrayed, humiliated before those who should have protected her. She had carried her pain to the roof, and in her final moment, it had hardened into fury. Her shoes, white with mourning, had been stained by her own blood, or perhaps by the memory of those who mocked her. The roof was not just her place of death, it was her verdict. And the steps we heard each night were her endless retracing of that last walk, the rage that refused to be still. The monk had been right. She was not looking for mercy. She was looking for recognition. But why me? Why had she chosen me to carry her fragments, her rage? As if in answer, the glass beside me shivered. The handprint pulsed faintly, a pale glow in the dark. I leaned close, breath fogging the window, and for the first time I whispered her truth aloud. You were left. You were shamed. You were betrayed. The room went still. The air thickened. And in that silence I felt her inside me, not as an intruder, but as a tide rising, filling, demanding to be heard. I realized then, the truth had never been buried. It had always been walking, pacing the roof, waiting for someone foolish enough to listen long enough to speak it back. And I had spoken it. The rope tightened. I was hers now. Once the truth had been spoken, silence no longer protected me. The footsteps grew bolder, the whispers clearer, the air in my room colder with every night. She had moved from shadow to presence, from presence to possession. I felt her in my bones, in my dreams, in the frost that clung to my window pane. Something had to be done. I returned to the temple, climbing the hill beneath the twisted pines. The old monk was waiting in the courtyard, as though he had known I would come. He said nothing, only gestured me inside. We sat across from one another in the dim hall. I told him everything. The shoe, the handprint, the visions, the notebook, the truth of her betrayal. His face did not change. He listened with the patience of stone. At last he said, "If you carry her now, you must attempt to soothe her. A ritual may calm what walks, even if it cannot end her steps. But you must understand, rituals do not erase. They only change the way the story is carried. What do I need to do?" He poured tea, the steam curling like incense. "Offerings, incense, rice, water. Speak her pain aloud. Do not ask her to forgive. Do not ask her to leave. Ask only that she rest for a while." His words chilled me more than any warning. Rest for a while, not rest forever. Still, I agreed. That night I prepared the ritual. I placed a bowl of rice on my desk, a cup of water beside it. I lit 3 sticks of incense, their smoke winding upward in ghostly threads. The shoe lay before me, canvas stiff with stains that would never fade. I bowed once, twice, 3 times, and then I spoke. I told her I had seen her walk the roof, that I had felt her rage, her humiliation, her betrayal. I said her truth aloud, every fragment I had pieced together from notebook, memory, dream. I did not beg. I did not plead. I only bore witness. The air thickened. The incense smoke bent sideways as though pushed by a breath. My skin prickled with cold. And then came the footsteps, inside my room this time. Slow, deliberate, circling the desk. I froze but forced my voice to continue. "You were left. You were mocked. You were betrayed." The footsteps stopped. The incense sputtered. I raised my head, and she was there. Not outside, not on the roof. In the room, standing across the desk. Her white handbag trailed along the floor, the fabric whispering like restless water. Her hair fell forward, hiding her face. Her hands trembled at her sides. She looked at the offerings, then at me. For a moment I thought she would reach for the rice, the water, the incense, but instead she raised her hand and pressed her palm against my chest again. The cold surged through me. My vision blurred. I heard whispers, not in Korean, not in English, but in a voice that was neither mine nor hers alone. A chorus, layered, ancient. And then I understood. She did not want peace. The monk had been right. Rituals soothe, but they do not erase. She had no interest in being freed. She wanted her rage remembered, her betrayal spoken aloud forever. She wanted to walk again and again, until every step was acknowledged. I tried to pull away, but her hand held me fast, not with strength, but with inevitability. My breath turned shallow, my heart beat to the rhythm of her steps. At last she withdrew. The offering sat untouched. The incense had burned low, its ash falling in fragile columns. She faded into the corner of the room, into shadow, into silence. But I felt her still inside me, heavier than before. At dawn I returned to the temple. The monk looked at me and nodded once, as if confirming what he already knew. "She will not leave," I said hoarsely. "She doesn't want release. She wants to be carried." He closed his eyes. "Some wounds do not heal. They do not ask for closure. They ask for witness." I shook my head, despair pressing in. "What happens to me?" He opened his eyes, ancient and sad. "You have already begun the ritual of caring. Every step she took, you will take. Every silence she bore, you will hear, until the story moves to someone else." His words struck me like a bell. I staggered out into the morning, the sunlight too harsh, the air too bright. Somewhere behind me on the temple roof, I thought I heard it again, the slow, deliberate tap of shoes. That night I placed the shoe back on the windowsill. I left the rice, the water, the incense. When the footsteps began above me, I did not resist. I listened, and in the rhythm of her walking, I felt my own pulse fall into step. The night of the ritual did not end with her departure. It ended with her inside me. I carried her like a second pulse, a shadow stitched beneath my skin. For days, I tried to keep to routine, classes, library, meals, but each moment was tinged by her presence. My shadows sometimes split in two, one half lagging behind, hair long, shoulders bowed. My reflection in windows flickered, showing her face where mine should be. No one else seemed to notice, or perhaps they had trained themselves not to look. The white shoe remained on my windowsill. I had left it there like an offering, a signal of surrender. Each morning it shifted slightly, angled differently, toe pointing in a new direction. Once I woke to find it balanced on the sill's very edge, as though ready to step off into nothing. By the seventh night, I no longer feared the footsteps. They had become as familiar as my own breathing. But that night, they sounded different, heavier, closer, not pacing the roof, but descending, step by step, as if stairs I could not see had lowered from above. I sat upright in bed, heart thudding. The air grew thick, heavy with the smell of wet stone and old incense. The window pane frosted over, and on it bloomed a palm print, larger than before, darker, more defined. And then, silence. I waited, every nerve stretched. The silence deepened, pressing in, until I realized it wasn't silence at all. It was listening. The whole dormitory was holding its breath. I whispered, "I hear you." The words fogged the air, and the room answered. From the corner she stepped forward, the woman in white. Her handbag trailed along the floor, soaking in stains that spread without source. Her face was hidden, but I felt her eyes, black hollows pulling me in. She reached for me, and this time I did not recoil. Her cold hand pressed against my chest. My body jolted, but I did not resist. I let the tide rise, let her fill me. Memories not mine surged. The roof's edge, the laughter below, the man turning away, the shame, the rage, the fall. I gasped, but the sound that left me was hers. She leaned closer, her hair brushing my cheek, and for the first time she spoke in words I understood. "Walk with me." The room dissolved. I was on the roof, tiles slick underfoot, the night wide and merciless. She stood beside me, her white shoes dripping red. I looked down and saw that I too wore them now, my feet no longer my own. We walked together, step for step, the sound echoing across the tiles. Somewhere below, I thought I heard voices, students whispering, warning one another never to go up there, never to listen, never to leave their shoes out at night. Their fear was a distant thing, powerless against the weight of her footsteps, and now mine. At the edge of the roof, she paused. She turned to me. I could not see her face, but I knew she was smiling, a smile born not of joy, but of recognition. And then together, we stepped forward. I do not remember the fall, only the walking, always the walking. If you come to the dormitory and hear footsteps at night, you may think it is only her, but listen closely. There are two pairs now, and one day perhaps there will be more. Thanks for watching the whole video. Please give me a like and subscribe to the channel to watch more interesting stories.